Good day, everyone. So, our topic for this time is economic systems and economic outcomes. The continuation of John Kerry David report. I'm Mike Julius M. Napiza, your discussant for today. Viability. The ultimate test of an economic system is its long-term viability. The basic premise of Martian economies was the over course of history. Superior ecosystems replace inferior ones. In the Martian scheme, capitalism replaces feudalism, and then socialism replaces capitalism. Inferior systems are beset by international contradictions that make it impossible for them to survive over the long term. Karl Marx depicted capitalism as unstable suffering from number of unsurmountable internal contradictions. These internal contradictions, he believed, ensured the eventual demise of capitalism and its replacement by the superior systems of socialism. If we say viability, we were pertaining to some course of action if yung particular action ba na iyon is successful or hindi. So in this part, Karl Marx argued na over the long-term viability, capitalism won't work because in the end, superior replaces the inferiors. He sees capitalism as unstable kasi 'di ba? In capitalism, there are what we call the winners and the losers that also can cause suffering. That at the end of the day, he said the government will take over. However, in Soviet experiment, they saw that socialism is inefficient and also can suppress economic growth since the government holds the market and therefore there's no option and it's hard for the people to have demand. Eh di ba, one way to boost the economy is by increasing the demand of people. It may be premature to declare the planned socialist system dead. The moral way from socialism is the former Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe could be reversed. Socialism continues to have appeal in China, which is combining communist dictatorship with market reform and opening up of the economy to international trade and investment. It also continues to have a strong emotional appeal because of its promise of equity and stability. Many still believe that an economy run by planners and bureaucrats will function better than one dictated by the chaos of market. Many respond to socialism's appeal for fairness as a way to improve society. They see as dominated by rich Wall Street bankers and greedy CEOs. Next is evaluating performance. What is what determines success? From the beginning of the post-war era to the collapse of Soviet Union, there was protracted debate about the superiority of economic systems. In the heady 1950s, after the USSR launched the first rocket in space and recorded rapid rates of growth, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev announced that he would bury the United States. There was no longer a need for war, he said. The Soviet Union need only demonstrate its economic superiority to the rest of the world. In this time period, the poorer countries of the globe in fact looked to Soviet Union for guidance. And USA comparisons raised probably for the first time practical issues of how to evaluate an economic system's performance. When we compare economic outcomes of different economic systems, we wish to determine which economic system performs better. But there is no clear and simple way to decide which outcome is better, unless one economic system outperforms the other with respect to all possible outcomes. Next is weights. To evaluate outcomes, we must decide the importance of each of the performance criteria: growth, efficiency, equity, and stability. We must different results of by assigning weights to produce a single index of achievement. Weights are said to determine the achievement of economic outcomes. Others might say na yung indicator ng achievement ng economic outcome is yung pag-unlad ng ekonomiya. But some, they see economic achievement indicator if people have guaranteed jobs and people can ensure pervasive social safety even if that means lower growth. There is another question. Whose weights do we use in evaluating outcomes? in the Soviet Union and contemporary China, the preference of communist political authorities appear to count most, although Chinese Communist Party leadership appears to pay attention to what the people want. In volatile world, ignoring the people had its consequences as events in Middle East in early 2011. In market economies, what is produced and for whom is decided largely by the market, although state of left with producing public goods and providing social welfare. In dictatorships, the dictator's preference dominate. In democracies, the will of voters count most. The will of voters can be distorted by lobbying, political corruption, and influence peddling, but by and large, the people ultimately decide. Social norms. Different societies have different cultures, norms, and customs. Then according to stereotypes, Asian cultures have value working together collectively and rare more respectful of authority. Where areas, the US frontier society values rugged individualism. The Europeans are said to value leisure more than their North American counterparts. In some societies, losing face can be a personal tragedy, whereas other societies shrug such things off as something to be forgotten quickly or even exploited. With differing norms, it is hard to say na magkakapareho tayo ng weights kasi iba-iba tayo ng binavalue. As shown in the figure 3.5, it focuses on just one dimension of differences in norms among different societies. Support for democracy, where a higher number indicates greater support. It shows that citizens of sub-Saharan Africa and of Orthodox Islamic states have little support for democracy. Catholic European, Confucian, and Latin American citizens offer intermediate levels of support. English-speaking citizens and Protestant Europeans have the highest level of support for democracy. The stability of economic systems depend on whether the next generation is in agreement with its basic characteristics. The Gallup organization carried out poll of young people aged 19 to 24 to determine with what institutions young people are dissatisfied, which tell us which institutions they would like to change. In figure 3.6 naman, it shows that young citizens of different cultures have different evaluations of systems of institutions they face in their daily lives. American and Australian youth share fairly equal concerns about social welfare for the poor and the environment. French, Indian, and Philippine youth are most concerned about differences between the rich and poor, although the French distribution of income is much more equal than in the other two countries. Indian youth are almost as concerned about the laxity of law, order, and morality as they are about the distribution of income. It is for a fact na in economics, we can have it all. Diba we are facing trade-offs? In many cases, specific goals can often be achieved only by sacrificing other, less important goals. The necessity of choosing to pursue some goals at the expense of others is a consequence of fundamental scarcity of resources, which prevent every economic systems from producing unlimited quantities of goods and services. Instead, choices must be made among goals. The nature of these sacrifices is often subject to dispute. Can unemployment be lowered without increasing inflation? Is sustained economic growth compatible with a cleaner environment? Can affluent economies maintain generous welfare and benefits programs without sacrificing economic growth? Can China maintain an open economy and the political dictatorships its leaders desire? Trade-offs matter in at least two ways. First is we cannot assess performance of economic systems without understanding their trade-offs among alternatives. Second, when one goal must be sacrificed to achieve another, we should not criticize a system for not achieving a goal that it has, in effect, decided not to pursue. In the contemporary world, there is agreement that economic growth, good employment, and opportunities, price stability, technological innovation, economic security, clean environment, and a good distribution of income in different people define good differently are desirable. But there is disagreement of trade-offs. Trade-off refers to sacrifice of one thing, such as one economic goal for another. One of the most basic lessons of economics is that there is no such thing as a free lunch. We understand trade-offs only imperfectly. Microeconomists have debated for a long time whether we must trade off higher inflation for low unemployment. Environmental activists have argued that we should accept lower growth or lower living standards for a cleaner environment. If all performance criteria were compatible, measuring economic performance would be less complicated. If high growth meant the automatic achievement of other goals, countries would need only to aim one goal and expect to achieve the others spontaneously. This is not the way the world works. However, achieving one goal often requires sacrificing another. Consider idea ng socialism or communism wherein the idea revolves in fairness in distribution of resources. Do you think it would be fair sa iba na nagtatrabaho ang nagkikerry ng burden at risk sa trabaho? Kung gano'n naman pala, di sana din na lang din sila nagtatrabaho kasi there is no incentives in working hard kasi in the end magiging equal din yung distribution. Another is yung mga countries na nag-aim ng rapid economic growth. If that's the case, according to the module, teenagers and retired persons are forced to work. They need to employ extensive expansions of output na hindi rin maganda dahil hindi magiging efficient ang workforce. These are the reasons why we face trade-offs, kung bakit there's a need for us na mag-sacrifice, for us na makapag-focus sa economic goal. Next, maximizing according to constraints. So despite differing values and norms, which led us to weigh economic outcomes differently, we all share the common objective of getting the most out of what we have. All societies should share the objective of achieving the maximal value of its economic outcome, or O, subject to constraints imposed by economic system, policies, and environmental factors, and V, which include technology and resource constraints. The objective then is to maximize O, subject to ES, ENV, POL. This formula suggests how to evaluate the effect of ES on O after adjusting for differences in environment and policy. Solving the ceteris paribus problem, we can conceptually determine which system achieved the higher economic outcome. As denoted, the economic outcome, O, is a combination of performance indicators which are weighted differently by different societies. So O equals summation K, J equals 1, A, J, OJ, where OJ 1/4 desirable or undesirable if negative economic outcomes. AJ 1/4 the relative importance of the various outcomes. In sum, to capture the impact of economic systems on outcomes, we must know a great deal. We must be able somehow to measure the economic systems, which is itself comprised of number of institutions. We must be able to hold ENV and POL constant, and we must know the weights that society uses to value the various performance indicators. Measuring the impact of economic system on performance applications. As a result of the USSR's superpower status, years of serious research went into comparing Soviet economic outcomes with its rival superpower, the United States. We knew that the United States and the Soviet Union had quite different economic systems. One a planned socialist economy, the other a market capitalist country. One could after theoretical arguments in favor of superiority of either system. Those who believe in scientific planning could argue that experts planners could produce a better result than the market. Those who understood the enormous complexity of national planning could argue such an economic system would be possible in practice. There were measurable performance differences in Soviet American comparisons. The USSR's measured growth rate was initially higher than the US rate, although it was steadily declining after the mid-1960s. However, the USSR was a latecomer to growth and had a lot of catching up to do. Both countries fielded powerful militaries despite the USSR lower per capita output. The Soviet economy offered guaranteed employment. There were periods of high unemployment in the United States. The USSR published no unemployment statistics, claiming there was none. The United States was clearly doing a better job in technological innovation as measured by landmark inventions and innovations. The USSR had a more equal distribution of income but a less equal distribution of political power, which was concentrated in the hands of few members of monopoly Communist Party. Although the answer to the superiority question later became obvious with the collapse of Soviet system, researchers had great difficulty coming up with definitive answer because each system outperformed the other in one or more areas. Which system was better, therefore, depended on the weights attached to each performance measure. If economic growth was the most important, the Soviet economy throughout much of its history outperformed the US economy. If technological innovation was more important, the United States was the clear winner. If the stability of employment dominated, the USSR was the winner. The end of the Soviet Union in December of 1991 ended discussion these issues. Natural experiments. It is a situations in which persons are assigned randomly to a treatment or multiple treatments, and a control group and outcomes are analyzed for the purposes of putting a hypothesis to severe test. The treatment that was said in the definition would definitely be the Soviet economic system, and the importance of natural experiments was mainly to see the impact of economic system and its outcomes. We can connect it with different countries on which were one before but remain split because of its differences in economic and political after war. For example, North and South Korea is quite familiar to us, isn't it? They split at the end of World War II and remained separated after the Korean War. After those wars, North Korea adopted a version of Soviet system partnered by a personalized dictatorship in which was different to South since they began as military dictatorship which was then evolved by democracy. Today, citizens of North have no political freedom and can be executed if ever they speak badly about their government. Periodic famines are also present. It is a lot more different than South since they built relationships with wealthy countries that made them survive, making living of citizen even the average ones lot easier. We can conclude in this that comparing the two countries, the economic systems of South Korea is better than the North. Evaluating system performance without natural experiments. Natural experiments are rare. In other cases, we must somehow sort out the impact of economic system on how economic outcome from the effects of environmental and policy factors. So, after the collapse of communism, we must have to deal with less striking contrasts, such as differences between the capitalism of the United States and of Europe, or between the industrial policy of Japan, Russia, and China. In the 1980s and 1990s, the United States economy grew more rapidly than Europe's, During this period of time, the United States changed its tax system and passed welfare reform, but it also saw the spread of personal computers and the internet into business and households. Was the higher US growth the result of changes in institutions or the result of the environmental factor, the countries reaping the benefits of the computer and the information revolution? One avenue is to examine the performance of economic systems after significant changes have been put in place. In countries where growth accelerated, such as China, India, and Chile, we could look for institutional changes that would have accelerated growth. In this case of China, we would look to the decisions beginning in 1977 and 1978 to reform China's planned socialist economy. In Chile, we might look at the privatization of its pension system, which promoted increased capital formation. In the case of India, we might look at its market-oriented reforms begun in 1990 and continued to the present day. Last, the sorting out of economic system, environmental effects, and policy effects typically requires statistical or econometric analysis. So if we related just one factor to an economic outcome, we might falsely conclude that one had caused the other. Only by examining the effects of all three factors simultaneously can we isolate the effect of the economic system on economic outcomes. Freedom, corruption, and governance. Agencies, both public and private, produce ratings of countries on metrics of institutional development. Some seek to capture metrics of interest to international businesses and investors, such as indicators of business risk or International Country Risk Guide or ICRG or Country Competitiveness, the World Competitiveness Report. Others look directly at institutions such as perceptions of corruption, transparency, international or economic and political freedom indexes. These indices of economic institutions are based on perceptions of experts. Transparency International, for example, as officials and business persons familiar with the country, their perceptions of how honest or corrupt a country is. Others provide further detail of institutional development by categories. Index of Economic Freedom is published by the Heritage of Foundation and the Wall Street Journal, starting with data for 1994. Although coverage for the full set of transition countries is only done as of 1997, there is an overall index that is based on the evaluation of outside experts of 10 specific institutional factors or areas that are considered to be relevant for economic freedom. These are trade, taxation, government intervention, monetary policy, foreign investment, banking, wages, and prices, property rights regulation, and black market. It is very thorough and looks reasonable, but it's still fundamentally subjective. Summary. First is outcomes are influenced by the prevailing economic systems as well as by environmental factors and policy factors. Second, we must solve the ceteris paribus problem in order to capture the effect of the economic system on economic outcomes. Last is society should maximize its objectives subject to its economic system, environment, and policy. That's all. Thank you.